Good evening, everyone. Good evening, nymphers. I'm Tom Rosenbauer. I'm here with my friend Davis James tonight. Davis is it your position is community? Is it community manager?
Yeah, community leader in Colorado, kind of more
In
specifically
Colorado,
the Front Range area of Colorado.
right? So Davis is the Orvis kind of person on the ground for marketing and events and things in the greater Denver area. So I'm really happy that Davis could join us tonight, because Davis will add some more, I think detailed Western knowledge to what I can tell you about nymphing. And Davis has been worked in a fly shop at Front Range Angler. You've been a guide too, right?
Yeah, I worked for actually Anglers All in another shop in Golden,
Anglers All.
Yeah, I guided last year out of my boat, and then found myself at Orvis at the beginning of this year.
And we're very, very lucky and delighted to have you. And by the way, Davis and I are going to be traveling around to a number of Orvis dealers and stores in the Denver area next weekend, and late next week and next weekend. And we'll put up a link on there if you are interested in coming to see our presentation or just to say hi. Space is limited in the stores and the dealers because probably due to fire code, I would imagine. They can only have so many people. And Davis and I are, they're going to draw a huge crowd. So, but seriously, spaces are limited at these presentations. And so if you would like to go, if you're in that area of the world and you'd like to come and say hi, please sign up. And again, we'll put that sign up link in the comments. And I see some people are here. I see Roger Bird is here, and the infamous Ted Putnam, and Reg and Ed from Central Florida, and Thomas and Oregon Fishing Adventures, who already has a question. Should we answer this one?
Depends on how long you want to wait.
Yeah, it's there is a considerable weight difference between brass and tungsten beads, Oregon. And personally, I always use tungsten beads because I'm always trying to get my nymph down to the bottom as fast as possible. And I might use a small brass bead if I'm tying a nymph for really shallow water, but in that case, I'll usually put on a smaller tungsten bead instead of brass. So I know tungsten beads are a little more expensive, but I just use tungsten. How about you, Davis? Do you use brass beads at all?
I definitely still use brass beads when the fly that I'm wanting to fish doesn't have a tungsten bead. If I'm going through my box and looking for a pheasant tail of the right size and I'm out of the tungsten bead version, I'll switch to a brass bead.
So it's only as a last resort. Well, let's talk about fall nymphing. Let's start talking about it. And the beauty of doing this live is that you can ask questions as we go along about anything related to nymphs. If you ask us a question about dry flies or streamers, Tanner, our producer, is going to bounce you out and put you into next Thursday when we're talking about streamers. So we're gonna stick to fall nymphing today, and so let's talk about what goes on. Let's take a look at some of the bugs that you might see, and I'm gonna I'm gonna share my screen here. And how does that look? Because I can't see.
It's looking good.
Okay, so you got the full screen and everything.
Yeah.
So this is one of Davis's shots. Davis, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. So this
Brown
is
trout?
on a Freestone River in Colorado. This is like a late September float fish trip. I was on with some friends. The rain kind of started to really pick up. And for whatever reason, I mean, there were dry flies everywhere, but the fish weren't taking them. So we were, drifting. The river at this time of year is dropping. And so we were drifting nymph rigs. I believe we were fishing like a, 16 pheasant tail to a Baetis or a blue wing olive nymph. And we were fishing right off that steeper bank that you see on the left side of the photo. We're looking upstream, and we were coming down in the boat, and we were fishing off the right side of the boat in some, about 4 or 5 feet of water, just off that steep edge, but not right on the edge because we would get hung up. We were fishing maybe 6 or 8 feet away from the bank there. So that fish happened to take the Baetis, which was below, a heavier pheasant tail.
And here's what a Baetis hatch look like. The Baetis are little blue wing olives. They have kind of a brownish olive body and a bluish gray wing of various shades. Sometimes they're pale gray, sometimes they're dark gray, sometimes they're medium gray. And as Davis just described, the fish don't always eat the dry fly. Unfortunately, you have to go subsurface. This is one of the most common mayflies you're going to see in the fall, though. The most common mayfly, quite likely, that you're going to see in the fall. And the nymphs are pretty skinny. The nymphs are small and slim. This is, I don't know, it's some species of Baetis, I think. I'm not great on my entomology. And here is, the kind of fly you'd want. So you can see that it's not a big fly, and it's not bulky. It's very slim. And most of the subsurface stuff that you see, at least in mayflies and midges, is going to be fairly slim. Here's another shot of one of these little olive natural nymphs with an imitation above it. So those are some of the mayflies you're going to see. I'm going to come back to you guys and see if there's any questions.
In fact, that photo of the dry fly of the adult was taken on that same afternoon as that first picture you showed. So they were clearly out, but the fish wouldn't take them very readily.
So let's talk about, do we have any questions? Does time of year dictate how close to the bottom you tie your tag? Jim, I think it does, because in the fall, the fish are probably not actively feeding much in the middle of the water column. And the fish are going to be, the water's colder. Fish are probably going to be close to the bottom. Tanner, but I know you have some kind of intelligence about that you might want to share. I know
So I mean, typically speaking, if I get to the water earlier in the morning in the fall and it's pretty cold, I will fish deeper in the water column. That's where the temperature is a little bit more, generally a little warmer, a little more stable, less affected by that overnight low temperature. And so I typically will fish in the morning deeper in the water column and progressively, fish higher in the column as the day progresses and warms up. If it's one of those fall days that really feels like winter, I might fish a midge towards the bottom all day long.
Okay. Good. Um, any color preferences for the bugs? Well, and it really depends on what's hatching, but for the mayflies, most of them are going to be kind of a brownish, just kind of a dark brownish color this time of year. These olive nymphs, they have a little olive tinge, some of them, but it's a brownish olive, so it kind of a dark brownish olive. Generally for the mayflies, is recommended. Although, plain old pheasant tail, natural pheasant tail, which is more of a rusty brown, seems to work all the time. I don't think you want a pale cream or, I don't think you want anything on the light side, but I don't think in the fall you have to worry too much about the exact color.
Yeah, when in doubt, I'll fish a pheasant tail, with or without a bead if I'm just looking for a starting point.
Yeah. What is your recommended leader setup for your nymphing? That can be so different depending on the angler and the day. What I would suggest is that you start with a pre-made Euro nymphing leader. And Tanner, if you can put up that Euro nymphing page, Orvis sells a pre-made Euro nymphing leader, which has a sighter built in, has a tippet ring on it. It's a good place to start. I would start there, and then modify it based on what you read, what you hear on the internet. But it changes weekly, the recommended Euro nymphing leader, and I think it's still in a state of development. I don't think there's anything set in stone. The other place you might want to look is the YouTube video or the Learning Center video, Orvis Learning Center video that I did with George Daniel on Euro nymphing. George goes through building a whole Euro nymphing leader, the one he uses. So those are a couple references for you on building one of these leaders.
The one thing I've found with Euro nymphing is you modify your leader throughout the day more often than you would with an indicator setup. Because with an indicator, we can slide it up and down, make quite a bit of adjustment that way. Whereas with a Euro leader, you might be, increasing the length of your sighter, decreasing it, adding more tippet to the bottom and deeper water. You kind of tend to mess around with it a lot more often in between spots.
Bill, a typical size would be, for most of the time, be fairly small because what's hatching in the fall typically are either small mayflies or midges. And although there are caddis flies and stoneflies down there, and I wouldn't dissuade you from trying a larger nymph. It's probably best, use a two nymph rig. Use a big stonefly or a big caddis larva to get your fly down, and then make sure that you have a 16, 18, or even a 20 on there for a smaller fly. All right, let's talk about some of the other bugs. I'm going to share my screen again here. How's that? You see it okay?
Looking good.
Okay. So here's a typical, very popular Colorado fly. It's a bread crust is an old pattern. And this is Pat Dorsey, very famous Colorado angler, his version of the bread crust. But it's an old wet fly pattern. Probably 1930s, 1940s wet fly pattern that a lot of people use as a nymph. And I'm sure that if you're in Colorado, you can find them in a fly shop. If you're not in Colorado, they're pretty rare. But it's a good caddis larval imitation, and there are going to be caddis flies on the bottom for sure. The fish will eat these case caddis flies. I'm gonna
Yeah, it's a great
switch.
freestone and tailwater fly here in Colorado.
Yep. And then stoneflies, a lot of the stoneflies that live on the bottom are quite large, and many of the larger ones take 2 or even 3 years to develop. They don't hatch every year, so there are always going to be some large stoneflies on the bottom that get knocked out of place and get drifting in the current, and the fish grab them. So it's always worth it trying a larger stonefly.
Yeah, I like a stonefly as weight, in a rig, because they're present all year, and really is a good option to weigh your rig down in the water without using a ton of split shot.
It's a good anchor. And then there are midges. We're talking about nymph fishing here. We're not talking about the adults, but the fish eat these larvae. These larvae are present in hundreds of thousands or millions in every mile of river, particularly in tailwaters and rivers below dams. And midge larva doesn't look like much. It looks like a little tiny worm. And the imitations of them are fairly simple. They can be any color, from a white to a black to a chartreuse to a red. A lot of them are red, but they're in all different kinds of colors. And often, when you're fishing a midge larva, you have to try different colors. You have to switch around. But generally, if you have something like this emerging midge, I don't know what this. Garcia's
The rojo
midge.
midge.
And that's kind of an emerging midge, or the classic zebra midge style. This is actually the miracle nymph style, but it's more or less a zebra midge. This one's got a white body instead of a black body. But big fish do eat these little flies, as you can see. And then egg patterns. You're matching the hatch with an egg. Brown trout and brook trout spawn in the fall, and although we want to stay away from actively spawning fish, the fish, even the fish that are spawning, are looking out for eggs that have gotten dislodged from the red or the nest, and they'll gobble them up. And so various egg flies in the fall can work quite well. And I believe, there are also some certain bait fish that spawn in the fall. So egg flies are something to consider. Or you can combine an egg with a worm. This is a real dirty fly, really disgusting fly. It's some sort of like a steak and eggs, but it's a worm in a. It's actually not even an egg. It's a worm in a tungsten bead. It's a disgusting thing, and I use them all the time. The other thing that you might find in fall rivers are scuds or sow bugs. They're small freshwater crustaceans. These were taken out of the stomach of a trout in the fall. Stomach contents from a throat pump, and they're typically kind of grayish or olivish. The pinkish tan ones are what they look like after they've been partially digested by a trout. They turn pink when they die. And the imitations are this is a bead body scud, which is a fairly common imitation. This is a beadhead killer bug. Killer bug is an old English pattern that's just made out of yarn, just a piece of wool yarn, and I put a bright bead on the front of it. And so this is kind of the stuff that you'd see. It's fairly small, fairly thin. This is the kind of stuff that you that you would probably see in the fall. Come back to you here. And let's look at some questions. Placement of weights. There's a good one. Let's take that. Let's see if I can take that other slide off there. Yeah. Below or above the nymphs. Davis, what do you think?
I was going to say, what's your preference?
I usually put the weight above. I usually put the weight 6 inches above, if I use weight at all. Honestly, Jim, I avoid using split shot on my leader at all costs. It causes tangles, it slips. You have to put a knot in it to keep it from slipping. You can hit yourself in the head with it, and it hurts. What I'll do is try to maybe put on a heavier nymph for my upper fly first, and maybe go to a lighter tippet, because lighter tippets will sink quicker. And I'll do, or a longer tippet. I'll do everything I can not to put weight on my leader. But if I do, I'm one who puts it above the flies. How about you, Davis?
Same. I found that when casting, if you put weight between two flies, it kind of creates this sort of like rubber band effect, and it causes the two flies to collide into one another when you're casting. If I have to use split shot, I really like to use like a number 4 or something relatively small. And then I use a little bit of like this mud, this weighted mud, because you can easily peel it off when you're, moving to shallower water. You can kind of ditch, instead of putting multiple split shot on and dealing with the pain of trying to remove them. So above, and I usually keep it pretty light if I'm going to use it.
Yeah, it's also called sink putty. It's a tungsten putty with some adhesive on it, and it does come off occasionally, and it does slide a bit on your tippet. But if you put it on carefully and you really roll it on there, it'll stay on pretty well, as long as you're not doing a lot of false casting, which you shouldn't be when you're nymph fishing anyway. So, yeah, I forgot.
I like to encase a small split shot with it. I find it doesn't move around when you create like a membrane around the split shot, and then you move to a different hole. I peel off that outer layer, go back to that number 4 or whatever it is.
Interesting. What do you recommend for a dry dropper in the fall? I'd put a pheasant tail on there. Whatever dry fly you can see that you think a fish might eat, a hopper, parachute Adams, but I'd hang a pheasant tail, size 16 or 18 beadhead pheasant tail on there. How about you, Davis?
Yeah, my comment, Paul, is that a lot of folks will kind of tuck the hopper box away in August, thinking that it's over. And some of the better, eats on stuff like chubby Chernobyls or, bigger Amy Zants or whatever, Thunder Thighs hoppers happen in the, early fall, in September, even into October. So I still like to try something larger, especially if it's windy.
Yep. Can we talk about Perdigon nymphs? J-bar Perdigon nymphs are basically a very thinly dressed nymph. They're all different kinds, and the old saying amongst the Euro nymphers is "thin for the win," and that's thin on your tippet because a thin tippet presents less resistance to the water as it sinks, and thin on your fly because any thickness on your fly is again resistance to sinking. So Perdigons are great. They're very popular, and you don't have to use them in a Euro nymphing technique. I use them all the time as a dry dropper or with an indicator. It's not just a Euro fly, but at times they do work quite well, particularly for these little Baetis mayflies. Yeah. And they sink really well, and it may help you avoid using split shot, which again is very, very handy. What knots would you recommend for a dry dropper setup? Clinch knot, clinch knot, clinch knot, and clinch knot. Next. Standard clinch, not improved. That's what I use. It's what most guides use. If you fish with a guide and you ask them, as I do, every time I fish with a guide, I ask them, what do you use to tie on your fly? Clinch knot. What do you use to tie your dropper with? Whether you tie it to the bend or the eye, what do you use? Clinch knot. Improved? No. Standard clinch. Period. End of story. It's a great knot. It's easy to tie. If you like something like the double Davy knot, or you find something else that you like, then use it. It's any knot that you can tie. There's lots of great knots out there. Any knot that you can tie quickly and easily and will hold for you is fine. But I use clinch. The Orvis knot, Don, is also a good one. I agree. New to fly fishing, would the San Juan worm fit with nymph category? Absolutely, Walt. Yep. Worm flies can work really well in the fall, particularly if you have a little rise of water. There's both aquatic worms and terrestrial, typical earthworms that you find in your lawn. And if you get a rise of water, you get a rainstorm or something, those worms get dislodged from the bank. The aquatic worms also live along the banks in mud and weeds and stuff, and they'll get washed in a river. San Juan worm may also imitate a small San Juan worm, can probably imitate a big midge larva too. So yeah, great fly in the fall. Yeah, ready for the fly tying symposium. I'm tying off against Tim Flagler in New Jersey. Just learned to tie pheasant tail and hare's ear at a local Orvis shop. Awesome, Mystic Mac. Those are two. You probably don't need any other flies, at least nymphs are concerned. Doesn't loop knots make for better presentation than clinch? What do you think? What do you think, Davis?
I mean, you're theoretically going to get a little bit more movement out of it. But I think with nymphing and nymph rigging, it kind of comes down to what can you quickly re-rig with when you break the fly off. And loop knots are really not that hard to tie. I tend to fish them a little bit more in larger patterns. They kind of tend to have more profile and allow them to kick sideways like a streamer. Whereas a nymph tends to kind of look pretty similar the whole way around. I don't tend to use a loop knot with a nymph too often.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, the fish are grabbing these things so quickly that they don't see how much action the fly has. They just see a shape in the water. The shape looks like what they're eating, and they eat it. They don't follow it around and see if it wiggles. I don't like a loop knot because you got two pieces of stuff sticking out of the eye of the fly instead of one. It's a little bulkier. Hangs up more on weed and rocks and things. So I don't use loops on nymphs. No.
Yeah, we fish a lot of like 18 to 24 flies, and a loop knot can kind of throw off that profile of the fly a little bit.
Yeah. Ed, I seldom use I use a trialing knot all the time in saltwater bass fishing and carp fishing, but unless I'm like tying a big stonefly nymph to 5X, I don't use a trialing knot. But trialing knot is a good knot if you're tying a relatively thin tippet that's much thinner than the eye of the wire of the eye. If you stick your tippet through the eye, and the tippet looks much thinner than that eye, then a tri-lead knot will help keep your clinch knot from slipping. It's just basically a clinch knot where you go through the eye twice. Let's see. What else? I had a demoralizing day on the water. I didn't think about dry dropper setups until after I left the water. How long would you set your distance between top fly and bottom? Well, Boracua, it depends on the depth of the water, really. If you want to fish close to the bottom, you want that dropper below your dry fly to be about 1.5 times the water depth, because the dry fly, unless you're in really slow water, the nymph doesn't hang directly below the dry. It hangs at about a 45-degree angle. So rule of thumb is somewhere, you don't have to be exact, but somewhere around 1.5 times the water depth. And that's going to vary depending on the water you're fishing, and you may have to change your dropper. And no, as far as I know, there is not a good, simple way to have an adjustable dry dropper, unless Davis knows of a way to do it. I'm saying that I'm thinking that's a no.
No, I mean I've kind of messed around with some stuff, but
yeah,
nothing that's consistent. I think a lot of people do kind of go with that 20-inch mark as a starting point for a dry dropper, but I think you absolutely could go down to 36 inches and more if you needed to.
Yeah. Yes, you can Jose. You can Euro nymph for steelhead. It's quite effective. People have been doing it for a long time. They haven't been calling it Euro nymphing, but they've been using monofilament and a tight line right to the fly. And the flies I'd recommend would be whatever egg flies or nymphs are working in a particular river. That could change daily, and it could change with the river and the conditions. So some kind of egg fly and or some kind of nymph, where it's legal to fish 2 flies. I'd try one of each. A lot of places with steelhead, you can't use 2 flies, so you're going to have to pick one. Let's see. For contact doing degree. Yes, Peter, I absolutely agree. The best Euro nymph anglers pay very little attention to hatches. They're more concerned with weight, and they will change flies, but they don't agonize over fly pattern. They have a few flies that they have confidence in. They fish them, they get them to the right depth, and they catch lots of fish. So it's definitely not that important. East River is much easier to Euro nymph for steelhead. Okay, good. All right, let's go back to a few. Let's talk a little bit about water types. Hang on a second here.
Lots of good questions.
You want to answer some while I'm putting this up?
Well, I was going to kind of maybe just comment at the very end of Peter's statement there. I tend to just, if I'm Euro nymphing, I tend to just classify my flies as drab or flashy. And that was kind of a tip I got from a buddy of mine named Russell Miller. And he had spent some time on Team USA, and he sort of keeps it pretty simple. You got your drab flies on one side of the box and you're flashy. And you kind of, you're selecting more based on the depth and how far down you're trying to fish in the column. and then maybe only considering drab or flashy as far as changing your patterns out, not sort of like incrementally changing, as often, but really just kind of going from one to the other. I don't know if that made sense, but keeping it simple, I guess, is key there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't agonize over fly patterns, guys. There are many other things that you should do before changing your fly, changing your depth, changing the angle you cast at, changing the place you're standing, or just moving around in different places in a river before you change flies. Now here's a beautiful run that's got, it's got fast water, it's got slow water, it's got some depth to it, and this is the kind of water, and it's got some good movement and riffle water, and this is would work with either indicator or Euro style nymphing. Either way would work just fine here. And then as the weather gets colder and the water temperature drops, the fish are going to move into slower water. They just can't handle the current in faster water, and they're not getting enough food to be able to justify energetically holding in that faster water. So they're going to tuck into the deeper, slower places. They won't be in dead water. They won't be in totally stagnant water, because they have to have some current, both to feed and just to hold their position. But you do want to start to look for water like this as the water temperatures cool down. Now, in the fall, we often have low water. We don't always get a lot of rain. The water drops. The rainstorms aren't as big usually, and so you do in rivers that are very, very shallow, like this on the upper Connecticut and on the border between Vermont and New Hampshire. You do want to look for deeper slots where the fish are going to go into, because they're just unprotected from predators in that really shallow water. The other thing to do is to watch your flows. These USGS charts, you can find these on the Orvis fishing report. You can find them, just type in USGS stream flow and the river that you're looking for, and it'll show you the short term. It'll show you both the short term trend of the flow, and it'll show you the average flow, what the average flow might be. And so you can see when the water's rising, when it's dropping, before you head to the river, so that you will know what to expect. And it's not always due to the weather. If you fish on a tailwater below a dam, they could raise or lower that water with no regard to what the weather is doing. So you do want to keep an eye on these things, particularly before you nymph fish. And then the final image that we have here tonight is something to remember, and it's more important in the eastern United States, where you have more deciduous trees around the rivers. Leaves in the water make it tough. If there are a lot of leaves in the water, I don't go trout fishing. If it's a windy day, I don't go trout fishing. The fish tuck into places and they don't feed. Imagine if you were sitting in a restaurant and every time you took a bite, somebody slapped you in the face with a newspaper out of nowhere. You wouldn't stay in that restaurant very long. You'd go and hide somewhere, and that's what the fish do. So unfortunately, I don't I don't know of any way to get around leaves in the water. You can try fishing a streamer, because the fish might chase a streamer, but Leaves in the water also can make it a real pain to streamer fish. So, leaves in the water are just plain tough.
We'll test your patience for sure.
We'll test your patience. Here's a good one. Are you only fishing certain types of water, passing up other water you might fish dries or streamers? Yeah, Roger, I do. I do personally. It's really difficult to fish nymphs in really slow water. You can do it, and sometimes in the winter you have to do it. But if I'm gonna go out and fish nymphs, I'm gonna look for some current. A gentle riffle is generally the kind of water I look for. Not real fast, not real slow, with a broken surface. It seems like nymphs are more effective there. I don't know about you, Davis. What do you think?
I think I'm looking for a kind of a consistent lane that I can put a drift through. There's the type of water I like to fish with a streamer is kind of broken up with boulders and a lot of structure, and you won't get a very good drift or a very long drift anyway with like an indicator rig. You could maybe make some short Euro or tightline drifts through some of those bouldery areas, but typically with a nymph setup I'm looking for pretty consistent flow, and a relatively consistent depth. That way I can really work the water without fooling around too much with the tackle.
When using a nymph pattern that isn't working, do you first change the size of the fly in the same pattern or a different pattern fly altogether? Ooh, that's a good one. Christopher, my answer is I don't know. I do both, but usually if a nymph pattern isn't working and I'm fishing two nymphs, I'll change one of them and I'll change it to something totally different. Different color, a different amount of flash, different size, because if it isn't working, you might as well try something wild.
Yeah.
That's the thing about nymph fishing. You don't know, right? You can't often see a fish's reaction to a nymph that you can with a dry fly or even a streamer. So there's a lot of guesswork involved, and that's kind of the fun of it. The mystery of it is discovering what works.
I feel like if I'm in the realm of size, like I know I'm all right, most of the things I'm seeing, I'm kind of lifting up rocks and, maybe filtering the water a little bit, looking at the nymphs. They're all kind of a 16 or an 18. Okay. Then my fly change would go from like a hare's ear to like a rainbow warrior, kind of back to that drab and flashy. I might make a pretty distinct change just to see if that, causes a reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Tackle. I honestly don't think that Jorge, you need to worry about a different kind of rod for nymph fishing in the fall. I would use the same rod that I use in the summer or the spring. Typically a 9-foot 5-weight or a 9-foot 4-weight. A 5-weight is going to be, if you're planning on indicator fishing or dry dropper fishing, and you're planning on using some split shot, then a 5-weight's probably better. So you got more mass to deliver all that junk out there. 3-weight is better for a tight line situation or a very tiny indicator, smaller flies. But tight line or Euro nymphing, probably a 3-weight is better because you got the sensitivity. Got any thoughts on that, Davis?
Yeah, I fish, really a 5-weight pretty often. If I'm fishing maybe bigger water, I might up to a 6 and clunky stuff. But typically 5-weight is pretty much ideal. I've got the 9-foot 5-weight, the 9-foot 5-inch 5-weight here, which I like a lot. It's a little bit longer, and if I'm going to be mending, a lot of line all day, I like a little bit of a longer rod, but, without getting too specific, I think a 5-weight, in and around a 9-foot should get you well along the way. wouldn't hold you back, in any way.
No, and you can even throw a streamer or a dry if you certainly throw a streamer or a dry if you wanted to on a 5-weight. So it's very versatile rod. If you do really like Euro nymphing, then you probably want something like a 10 or 11 foot for a 3-weight for tight line fishing. But it's a more specialized rod, whereas the 5-weight's much more versatile. What determines whether you use a flashy fly or a drab fly? That's a good question. You want to take that one, Davis?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the first thing you could think about is water clarity. I mean, trout are actually pretty adept to seeing, nymphs very well, even in surprisingly dirty water. But if you're fishing pretty gin clear water and you're fishing like a flashier fly, or like a flashback or rainbow warrior type of fly or something, and you're just not getting any feedback, that's when I would make that flip flop, go to the drab or a more natural colored fly like a brown, like a pheasant tail, hare's ear, just to see if that's the differentiator there.
And the other thing that I tend to think about is there a lot of fishing pressure on this river, or is it relatively lightly fished? Because I think fish get a little suspicious to flashy flies where they've been caught on bead heads a lot, caught and released on bead heads. So I will tend to use a more drab fly in heavily fished rivers. Although that being said, I've had days where a big bright rainbow warrior would, on a bright sunny day in clear water, would work really well on heavily pressured fish. So you never know. You know that's nymph fishing. You just got to play around with a bunch of patterns. One of the best things you can do for there's been a lot of questions about selecting flies here, and one of the best things you can do is go to your local Orvis store, Orvis dealer, and ask them what's been working. And that can change with the season. So stop in, talk to the people in the shop, and buy a few flies. You don't want to take somebody's advantage of somebody's information without giving them some business. But they're going to know. They're going to know, rather than us guessing and telling you what to use, or you guessing. You want to go with a little bit of an education before you hit the water, and that's where Fly Shop comes in. They're extremely valuable.
Yeah, and I think a comment I'd like to make on top of that is, if you're going to a fly shop buying, a dozen different patterns that you don't know what they are, isn't very helpful, because you're sort of, it's like you've all of a sudden you have all these different options and you're not sure, what to use when. I kind of try to steer people towards fewer varieties of patterns, but more tried and true, 2 or 3 patterns that are, really pretty close based on the, the shop staff's suggestion, that are pretty close to, what you need to be fishing.
Our favorite indicator. So Paul, my favorite indicator is a dry fly. I like dry dropper, and I fish dry dropper an awful lot. But as you get into late in the fall, the chances of fish taking a dry fly are going to be pretty slim. And if I'm not using a lot of weight, I like yarn. I like the New Zealand strike indicator, or the Dorsey indicator, which, if you don't know what that is, you can look it up online, but it's one you make yourself with macrame yarn and a orthodontist or braces, whatever you call it, braces, rubber bands, those little tiny rubber bands. Really easy to make and very versatile. And then if I'm fishing a lot of junk, if I'm fishing a couple split shot and a couple big nymphs, the foam airlock indicators are my favorite, although I use them less and less these days. You got an airlock there?
Yeah, I like these for especially if you're kind of changing water types a lot. You can just quickly make a slide. You can slide it up and down. very easily and kind of make that adjustment super quick. I like fishing these 90-degree indicator setups. I think Scientific Anglers has this one, but you know, that one's pretty cool. It allows that indicator to kind of really move freely and for the leader to hang pretty much straight down. It's like a right angle leader.
Oh, they actually sell the lead. They sell the leader with the indicator right on it.
Yeah, this is pretty new. I got this from the shop recently. It just, you know, it's got the leader and a little swivel below it, so your rig below it is able to kind of move freely and not get all twisted up. You know, if you're fishing kind of a bigger fly that might twist your leader setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good plan. Good plan.
Sometimes the best indicator is the one you have.
Yeah, yeah. 7/8 weight is okay to use. I don't know if that's a comment or a question, Kevin, but yeah, you know, later in the season, the fish aren't going to be that spooky. They're going to be probably deeper and not near the surface. And you know, as long as you use a long enough leader to keep that heavier fly line away from the fish, you know, I like a 12-foot leader when I'm indicator nymphing or dry dropper fishing. 7/8 weight will be okay. I don't know if you're telling me or asking me, but I'm telling you. Can you swing nymphs like soft tackles or wet flies? Yeah. Yeah, particularly during a hatch. I'd use small ones. I'd use small, sparse ones. But yeah, during a blueing olive hatch or even a midge hatch, yes, you can absolutely swing soft tackles and wet flies. But keep them on the small side this time. Well, no, I shouldn't say that because there's a big caddisfly that hatches in the fall called the October caddis. It's kind of an orangey brown, and it's quite big. It's like a size 8 or a 10. They don't hatch in any great quantity, and I've never even seen them hatching. I think they may hatch at night, and they may crawl out of the water. I'm not quite sure, but the fish have got to be seeing the pupas at some point, or the drowned adults. And so, you know, a big kind of an orangey brown soft tackle just might work this time of year. You got one there?
I do actually. I kind of knew this was coming, but
cool.
I don't know how well you'll be able to see that.
There you go.
Quite a bit bigger than, you know, and they're a lot of fun to swing. I'll still swing, you know, pheasant tails even in the fall.
Here's a good one. Does the size or color of the indicator bother the fish? I think it does, Scott. I've seen streams that are heavily fished where you'll throw a pink indicator out there and the fish will move out of the way of the indicator. They'll slide off to the side or they'll even spook. So in general, if you're indicator fishing, use the smallest indicator you can get away with. It's going to cast easier and it's going to spook fewer fish. So just use an indicator that just will barely suspend what you're hanging off it. And usually if you're not using split shot, you can get away with a really small indicator. And sometimes in heavily fished waters, you want to think about using a white indicator or a clear indicator because they look like bubbles on the surface and they're not as likely to spook the fish. Sometimes a white indicator gets lost in really heavy water because there's a lot of white water, but you know, in that case, the fish probably aren't going to be spooky, and you can go to a brighter one. But yeah, I go to as small and as subtle an indicator as I can get away with. Apologies for the dog barking. The coyotes must be howling outside. Can trout see behind them? How's their field of vision? Well, Daniel, that's a good question. Trout do have a blind spot behind them. It's fairly narrow. I don't know how many degrees it is, but they can see. They have pretty good binocular vision. The problem is that it's only theoretical, because when a fish is feeding, it's moving from side to side in the water, grabbing stuff. And when they move from side to side, they can see behind them. So they notice things less directly behind them. But I would never assume that a trout's completely blind in a downstream direction, because I've tried to sneak up to fish directly behind them too many times and have them see me when they move off to the side to feed. So
they can also feel you, if you're stomping around,
yeah,
on the bank.
Yeah. Yes, I just talked about the Dorsey yarn indicator, Rube Dog. I fish them a lot. I think it's a great system. Absolutely. Yep. Great system. Did we miss any questions? I see a lot of comments. Looking for some questions. Any other questions from? This is your chance. You can watch this on the replay, but we're not going to answer your questions on the replay.
Somebody asked, what color bead head do you recommend for tying nymphs?
I often use black ones because I don't like the shine. But I know that there's certain ones that the kind of the pinkish shade seems to be sometimes effective. Copper, bright fluorescent orange. I mean,
yeah, there's a million colors now. I kind of bounce around between the regular tungsten color or brass color and silver. The Duracell is one of my favorite flies, just as like a starting point. And for some reason, I think that the one with the silver bead tends to work better than some of the other ones I've tied with like a brown bead. But, who knows why.
Yeah, that Duracell is a great fly. That Duracell is a really good fly. It shouldn't work. It's too bright. It's too flashy. It's a dumb looking fly, but man, it works. It really works. Here's a good one. What's most important? Fly selection, location, or presentation? Not a bad question at all, Alan.
It's a great question.
I would say location first, because if you're not fishing over fish, or if you're not fishing over a lot of fish, because we don't catch a tenth of the fish that are in the water. Probably we spook a lot of them, or they're just not interested. So interesting that you asked about location. People don't usually ask about that. Location first, presentation second, fly selection a distant third for me. How about you, Davis?
I mean, same. Location's a great call out because, some of the freestone rivers in Colorado, like the Arkansas, the Colorado, these fish tend to kind of migrate to different runs. And if you're fishing a run, maybe 5 miles downstream and, you fish for 3 hours and you haven't hooked or seen a single fish, you might move up, 2 miles upstream and discover there's a whole pod of fish, in the same type of water.
Yeah, actually, when I'm nymph fishing, I'll move long before I'll change my fly, or even my indicator depth. I'll move first. I move around a lot. I think that you have to, and so I'll keep the same rig on for an hour and just keep trying different water types before I even think about changing my fly, unless I know there's fish. Unless I know there's feeding fish in front of me. If not, I'm gonna move. I'm gonna keep moving around.
A lot of good questions coming in here.
What is your go-to fly? Don't have one. How about you? You have a go-to fly?
I mean, I'd say the one that's working, but a lot of times I'll start with a pheasant tail and just see what's going on.
Yeah. If I had to pick one, I'd say pheasant tail too. What leader material do you prefer? I like my leaders to be nylon, and I grease them. I grease them all the way down to my indicator. Dry fly fishing, I'll grease them, almost all the way to my fly because I like my leader to float. And when I'm nymph fishing, I use fluorocarbon for the tippet. So I'll add a fluorocarbon tippet to the nylon leader with a tippet ring if you don't trust the knot connection, or just a good solid blood knot or triple surgeon's knot. And furled, no, don't use it. How about you, Davis?
Yeah, if I'm fishing just exclusively subsurface in pressured clear water, I'll use like a 9-foot fluorocarbon leader, just to give me a little bit less light refraction. But really, I think most of the time I use a nylon leader with a fluorocarbon tippet. I like a little bit of that stretch that the nylon has. And then between my two flies in particular, I tend to use fluorocarbon. A little more abrasion resistant when you're drifting in and about the rocks and structure and stuff like that.
Leader for indicator nymphing. Typically, I'll just use a standard like 9-foot 4X, and then I'll either with a tippet ring or with a knot, I'll put fluorocarbon on the end of it and put my indicator somewhere up there. Although I did a podcast yesterday with an angler guide from New Zealand who does a lot of indicator nymphing. And what he does, if he's going to be strictly indicator nymphing, is he just uses straight 3X right off the end of his fly line, puts an indicator wherever he thinks it's appropriate to get to the right depth, and then he'll put a 4 or 5X tippet on the end of that. So he doesn't use a tapered leader at all. So there's lots of ways you can play this game, Paul. And I recommend that you play around with different ways and see what works for you. What do you use, Davis?
I like that, theory behind a non-tapered leader. I think if your flies from basically right below your indicator all the way down to your fly, there's no taper, it tends to cut through the water a little bit better. So a lot of times I'll just take an old leader. I'll run about, maybe 3 feet of butt section, so I have somewhere to slide the indicator. And then at that point, I'll tie like a tippet ring or a swivel or something to stop that indicator. And then from there all the way down to the flies, I'll just use 3 or 4X. Because with nymphs, we're often not really concerned about how well it sort of gently turns over. So I like to use a lot of straight sections of tippet. A lot of times I just use old leaders, snip them up and reuse them.
Yeah, that's like a right angle nymph rig.
Yeah, it's very much like that one I was showing earlier, where you just got that thicker butt section that holds onto your indicator, and then from there on down, it's just tippet.
Here's a good question. Once you catch a fish, should you move? No. Scott, typically if you catch a fish, it doesn't spook the other fish too much. The only time that I might move is if it's really clear water and shallow water, and I see the fish, the other fish, darting about as I'm playing the fish. Then I know that they're all going to be spooked and wigged out. But if you catch a fish, there's probably more in that little pocket. So I wouldn't move. Particularly rainbow trout. Boy, if you catch one rainbow trout, they tend to gang up in certain places in a riffle or a pool. And if you catch a rainbow, you want to hang in there. Alan, I don't play favorites, so I'm not gonna answer this question. I know tinkering today. You keep asking about pheasant tails. The center pheasant on a ringneck pheasant is used for pheasant tails. You can use the ones on the side too, but you're not going to get as many flies. And then the other feathers, just experiment. You can use them for nymph legs. You can use them for, big streamer flies, a big hackle in front of a streamer fly. There aren't many standard patterns that use feathers off the body of a pheasant, but that doesn't matter that there aren't any standard patterns. You just have to invent your own. So experiment with them, play around with them. Do you have any? Oh, the Carry Special is one that's an old West Coast wet fly that uses pheasant body feathers. I don't know of many others. Do you, Davis?
I mean, kind of a time-consuming one that can be fun to tie is the feathered Game Changer, using the pheasant feathers as like little shingles.
Yep.
I don't know if there's a cooler looking fly out there, but it certainly takes some time to put together.
Here's an interesting one. Recommendations on helping people find more time to fly fish. I do, as a matter of fact. I think that too many people feel that they have to go trout fishing and they have to drive 2 or 3 hours to go trout fishing. You probably, I can't help you find more time in your life if you're not going to prioritize fly fishing. If you can't prioritize it because you have other responsibilities. But I think that everybody can find a pond or a river close to their house where they can catch bluegills or carp or bass or whatever. It's not all about trout. You can have a lot of fun. In fact, Davis and I are next week when we're in Denver, we're gonna chase some carp in downtown Denver, and I'm really looking forward to it. So it's a matter of finding the closest place to go fishing. That's how to find more time. Other than that, I can't help you. Pardon? On your lunch break, before work, get up at dawn, after work, when your kids have gone to bed, you can find a little time usually. If you catch a fish, I'd stay where you are. Yep. All right. Any other questions? And Chris, I'm not telling you where we're going to go carp fishing. I don't tell people where I go fishing. I'm not a spot burner.
We're gonna go to Nebraska.
Oh, I bet they got good carp fishing in Nebraska.
Oh, they might.
Oh, this is a philosophical question. Is the internet hurting fly fishing? I don't know. You're watching the internet right now. Is it hurting your fly fishing or not? I think that probably the internet has really helped a lot of people learn how to fly fish, because video is certainly a great way to learn how to do it. I think it's hurt fly fishing because places like Instagram, where you get on there and you see all these big fish that people caught where you were fishing yesterday. Whether they caught them there or not, I don't know. But I think it instills unreasonable expectations in people, and I think it also makes people feel insecure just because they're not catching as many fish or as big a fish. So in that way, I think it's hurting.
Depends on what corner of the internet you're in.
Yeah. There's some bad corners of the internet, but there's a lot of good to it, and it's with us, right? It's not going to go away, so we might as well learn to deal with it. I think there is too much information. No, you take I don't think so. You take the information that you want and you ignore the rest. It's it's up to you. It's up to you. If you want to learn more about something and you want to hear about how other people are doing something in fly fishing, then you go on the internet. If you don't care, then you can ignore the information. Nobody's making you absorb all this information. And if you get confused, if you think it's too much, then don't do it. I personally don't ever look at Facebook. I look at Instagram, but I don't post on it anymore because I found that it was a time sink, and I thought I had more important things to do with my life, and I don't think I've looked at Twitter in like, I don't know, 8 years. So you can certainly be a successful angler and stay away from social media. However, I do look up fly patterns a lot on YouTube, and I watch lots of different fly tyers, and I like to look at new knots on YouTube, and sometimes new techniques, but fly tying especially. I don't think there's too much information about fly tying out there. What about you, Davis? How do you use the internet?
Oh man, loaded there. Yeah, I like the YouTube platform. I kind of, we're sort of trained to do the short form video, but I like longer form, learning a little bit more, diving a little deeper, things like that. I typically stay off of Facebook as much as possible to avoid, conversations with, old high school people, relatives, whatever. But it's a good place. There's a good place to learn. It depends on what you put into it, I guess.
And B, Rice, you're right. TikTok is not on my radar. I'm familiar with it, and I looked at it once, and I said, "Nah, I don't think so. I think I got better things to do."
We're not going to see a Tom's TikTok anytime soon.
No, I don't think so, unless my boss tells me I have to do it. Well, that is a great statement. There is nothing like catching your first trout or your first fish, period, on a fly you tied yourself. I don't think there's any greater pleasure.
Tom, what was the first fly you tied that caught a fish? Do you have that?
I don't remember because I started out fishing for white perch and white bass and bluegills and sunfish on Lake Ontario, bays on Lake Ontario. I don't remember what that was, but I do remember my first trout on a fly. It was a brown trout about 8 inches long on a jassid. You know what a jassid is?
I don't know.
It's an old Vince Marinaro pattern from Pennsylvania, and it's one little tiny jungle cock eye tied flat over a palmer hackled body.
Huh.
It's a little leafhopper beetle imitation. It's an old pattern. Still works, but yeah, I remember that for sure.
I think my first tied fly was like a watermelon red looking thing for bluegill. But I won't forget it.
Who are some of the fly tyers you watch on YouTube? Well, of course, I watch Cheech from Fly Fish Food. I watch Tim Flagler all the time, even though I tie against him once a month. I want to see what he's up to because he's great. And there's a lot of other ones. I can't, Barry Ord Clark. God, there's a number of them. In the Riffle. I think their fly tying videos are good. But yeah, those are some of the ones that I watch. How about you, Davis? You got some favorites?
I do. I don't know. This last year, I typically tie flies around this time of year through the winter, and kind of went down the Gunnar Bramer wormhole of reverse tied bucktail and Blaine chocolate. I like tying a lot of streamers. Tim Flagler as well. I think he's got some good tips. I learned a lot over the years from a guy named Greg Garcia. He's very meticulous fly tyer. So watched a lot of his, soft hackle fly time videos and dry fly videos. But I kind of find myself lost in fly tying video world online and watch a lot of them. Usually around this time of year. Cheech as well. He does a great job with those fly fish food videos.
Yeah. Well, I see a lot of comments and no questions, and we've gone well over an hour. I didn't realize it. It's 9:15, at least Eastern time. So I just want to thank everyone for coming in today. Those are some great questions. We really appreciate you. We really appreciate you coming in tonight and spending over an hour with us and sharing your thoughts and asking great questions. And if you're in the greater Denver area, Davis and I will be visiting the two Orvis shops and 3 different dealers in the Denver area, and you can find that on the Angling Discovery Series, which is right there in the comments. So, and again, if you want to come and see us, we're going to do some presentations. I would sign up because the seating is limited. In some of these, some of these shops aren't very big. The seating is limited, so sign up if you want to go. It's free. Just need to sign up. And by the way, if you didn't,
Wednesday.
Yeah, starting next Wednesday. And by the way, if you didn't like tonight's presentation, you want a refund on your price of admission, just email Davis and he'll give you your money back for this presentation. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. And don't forget, if you're interested in streamer fishing, tune in next Thursday night where we'll have 2 experts from Orvis. I forgot who's doing it. Do you remember who's doing it?
I think it's you and Sean Combs.
It's not me.
Oh, well, Sean Combs is, I think, part of it.
Oh, Sean Combs. Oh, that'll be good. That'll be good. I'll be in Denver with you. I'm not doing it next week.
Yeah, I'll give everyone their money back if they just, spend it next week.
Yeah. All right. Well, don't miss Sean Combs's streamer presentation because he's a hoot. He's one of my favorite fishing buddies, and he's awesome. He's a Orvis rod designer and reel designer, and you'll enjoy that. So tune in next Thursday. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tonight, and hope to talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.